My name's Susan Jacob. I'm Chief Executive at Safe Lives, and looking forward to taking everybody through some of the information that we need for this webinar. If you go to the second slide, just talk through the agenda for the session. Just to give you a sense of what we're covering today, a bit of an introduction from me about who we are at Safe Lives and what does it mean to be a beacon site and who's involved in that and how do we think it will work. Then the team are going to talk through what exactly the work is, the approach to it, the model, the service specification, and how we've been creating that with survivors, people who've got lived experience themselves. And that's a combined approach from your local team in West Sussex and also from some of the Safe Lives team and Rachel Williams, who's one of our pioneers, a survivor who herself has lived experience. And then we'll talk a little bit about key criteria for people who would like to put a bid forward to take part in the work, try and give you as much of a steer as we possibly can about what we'll be looking for and what the process is like. So I'm going to take slides 3 and 4 together to tell you a bit about Safe Lives. Some of you will know us, some of you won't. We were set up in 2004. And those people who know us will probably most closely associate us with the role of the IDVA, the Independent Domestic Violence Advisor, and also the MARAC, the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference. We were set up and founded on the basis that anybody who was living with domestic abuse should have more choice available to them than fleeing in the middle of the night with the bin bags and the kids. Thinking about how you could make it safe for people to stay at home, because everyone has a right to live in their own home if it's at all possible, and we wanted to look at how we could make that a reality for people. We also wanted to build the professional status of people in the voluntary sector who are working so hard to counter domestic abuse. We knew that they were struggling to get to the table sometimes and work on an equal footing with people from statutory services. And that felt important to us, so that's another part of how we were built. We don't provide any frontline services ourselves at Safe Lives, but we aim to put tools, support, guidance, data and training in the hands of people who are on the front line, whether they're in voluntary sector organisations or whether they're in the statutory sector. And I hope what we're also known for and what we really aspire to do is solve problems, get the barriers out of the way that people are facing. We know these are really, really hard jobs, and we're trying to make them easier where we can and listen to people about what they're experiencing. And we're also about innovating. So we're constantly looking for improvement in what we've created, in what other people have created, and innovating where we see gaps and where we see that things still need to be improved. So in terms of slide 5, and the partnership between Safe Lives and Women's Aid. I mentioned that we were set up in 2004. In 2014, at Safe Lives, we took stock, where we'd been going for 10 years, and thought we had 2 strategic objectives when we first started as an organisation. One was to halve the length of time that it took for somebody to get effective help, and the other was to halve the number of people overall who were living with domestic abuse. And in 2014, we did quite a big piece of work looking at what impact, not just we'd had, but how things had changed in many bits of the sector, in all bits of the statutory sector and the voluntary sector organisations. And we felt that collectively, we had managed to halve the length of time that it took for somebody to get effective help from around 5 years to around 2.5 years. So that was a cause for celebration. But we hadn't, we felt, shifted at all the overall number of people who were living with domestic abuse. That didn't seem to have shifted. And so we had quite a hard look at ourselves and what we could do, and thought there's much bigger change required than anything we've done so far, hard as it was. We can't just do more of the same. That's not going to be what solves it. And it's not just about services that currently exist. There are probably other kinds of services in complement to, rather than instead of, what's already out there. So that was a big shift in our thinking, in particular thinking about all members of the family, alongside still keeping right at the centre that adult victim or young person or child that's living with domestic abuse, also thinking about all the other members of the family and how those interact with each other. And it felt important to us that if we were ever really going to get to the root cause of the problem, then we would have to think about all of those family members and the way they connect with each other. And that obviously has to involve lots of people inside and outside our own small sector dealing with domestic abuse, in particular thinking about mental health, substance misuse, services for perpetrators, housing services, and many others. And as we did that, Women's Aid were going through a similar process of taking stock and thinking about their strategy. We were both having conversations with a number of partners and funders, and both those partners and those funders were keen to see the two organisations working together. And so what you see there on slide 5 is our commitment as two of the bigger organisations in the sector to jointly trial different approaches in different bits of the country, but keep bringing those approaches back together through a single independent evaluation from the University of Central Lancashire, and learn from each other and learn from the mistakes we're making as well as the good things we're finding, and try to be really, really open with each other about how we can create that really big systems change that's still needed. So moving on to slide 6, this is where we began to come out in 2014, which is our blueprint for safety, and that's been something that's been guiding us for the last 3 years at Safe Lives. And what you see on this page, I know it's a bit complicated, but what we're trying to explain is some of the component parts that we think is needed to create a beacon site for change. And West Sussex is one of those beacon sites. And you'll be hearing from Joe Millward in the Sussex team in a second. So what we were looking for was a number of ways in which to fill the gaps that we thought still existed in frontline provision. And that included all the things that we had been talking about for 10 years as an organisation in terms of support for people who are at the very highest risk of serious harm or murder, but also expanding out that provision and making sure that, as I mentioned, that it coordinated across all members of the family. So at the bottom middle there, you can see we're talking about a perpetrator response, that's DRIVE, and that's been active in West Sussex now for 18 months as a pilot programme. And we've had the year 1 evaluation on that published by the University of Bristol. It also meant One Front Door, which is a way of bringing together all family members and all the different issues that they're facing. We know in your local area, as in every other bit of the country, you're sort of drowning sometimes in different strategies for different issues, and sometimes we lose sight of the fact that some of those issues are happening to the same people and the same families, and therefore kind of coordinating that all in the same place. So One Front Door is also a part of that. And then the other aspects that you see on this page around all victims at all levels of risk, children and young people experiencing domestic abuse, those people who've got very complex needs, so a combination of domestic abuse with maybe substance and alcohol misuse and mental health issues, trying to think of what's the best response for people in that situation. We know at the moment the services are struggling to meet their needs. People who stay in their relationships, and Rachel is going to talk a lot more about each of these parts, but this one I think is quite a difficult topic. Sometimes we don't like to think about the concept of people staying in the relationship when, to all intents and purposes, that's an abusive relationship, but that is a lot of people's reality. So we're trying to respond to that. And then thinking about how people rebuild and recover and build up their resilience after an abusive relationship has ended, and they want to safeguard themselves and their children and their family for the future and make sure that cycle doesn't happen again. And so all of these things together are some of the component parts that we hope can be put in one place in West Sussex to create this concept of the beacon site. And for us, though these are shown as different parts, I guess I would stress that we think of this as a single approach, not just a series of different interventions. we think of it very much as a partnership between lots and lots of different people. And we're talking in a little bit in this webinar about the kinds of approaches people in a frontline service might take to join up with each other and deliver some of this work. And as a way of learning together, because we're not claiming at this stage that we know that all of this works or how it works and who it works for. So this is a learning process, and what we hope is that everybody will go into it recognizing that it's a learning process, and it may be that there are things that are not right about the model we've created or that we need to learn about as we go along, and we hope everyone will engage in that spirit, which is really open willingness to talk about the things that are difficult as well as the things that seem to work really well. And I would stress, I guess, that we are building on what's already going on in West Sussex. This is not something that we're dumping down without trying to connect it to all of the fantastic work that's already going on in the local area. And I know there's been loads of work recently, in particular around the early help model and other aspects of what goes on in West Sussex. And we really want to connect with all of that. So we want to make sure that whatever we're creating through this process connects with what you're already doing in West Sussex and what works in West Sussex, and taking account of the local situation. And that's probably it on this slide.
So over to Jo Millwood.
So can I just introduce myself, and thank you for that, Suzanne. I'm Jo Millward, and I am a service leader at West Sussex County Council, and I have the strategic lead for domestic abuse for West Sussex. You'll see from slides 7 and 8 that I've given you some of the sort of background domestic abuse statistics, but what I sort of want to start by saying is that we're really excited about this project. West Sussex is a very large county in the south of England, and we're a sort of two-tier local authority, and I think we really have a good working relationship with our district and borough colleagues, as well as our voluntary sector in West Sussex. And we've always taken the domestic abuse work really seriously, and have had Worth services running now for over 10 years. And we've always worked with victims to try and improve the service as we've gone along. Domestic abuse is one of those things in West Sussex that it's really hard to say we are doing well, but actually what we do know is that more people are reporting domestic abuse to us, and that they are getting supported through that process. But as with all of these things, we can still do more. And what I'm really pleased about with this project is that actually we're going to be looking at the whole family, and not just that focus on either the perpetrator or the victim or the child, and actually we would be looking at all of that together. So just sort of going on a little bit more about West Sussex, we went through a transformation programme in April of last year, following a recommendation from our select committee, and that was around making sure that all services were working together. So we brought together our early childhood service, which was our Children and Families Centre work, our Think Family and Early Help work, which was working, which is our name for our Troubled Families programme, Youth Services, our Young Carers programme, Worth Services, and our Healthy Child programme, which is our school nurse programme, and health visitors. And the reason for doing that is because what we recognised is that people were still working in silos. They weren't working with the whole family. Families were still telling their story to 5, 6, 7 different agencies that were working with them. And what we wanted was for one person to be working with that family, but to bring in others as a team around that family as and when that family needed it, rather than bombarding them with lots of professionals going in to see them when actually they weren't ready for a service at that time. So in April of last year, we launched our Integrated Prevention and Earliest Help Service, also known as IPI, and it's going really well. And around domestic abuse, we took domestic abuse to a local level. So actually we have 6 hubs across West Sussex in each of the district and borough areas, and each of those have 1 or 2 domestic abuse workers that are dealing with those high-risk cases. We also took MARACs to a local level, so we have 4 MARACs across West Sussex. And the reason for doing that, one of the guiding principles of IPI is around making sure that we know every child of West Sussex, or somebody knows every child of West Sussex. So actually taking MARACs down to a local level and having those MARACs run by the individual hubs meant that actually we know our families that are coming to these different forums, and therefore we can work with that family as to who the best person to work with that family is. And again, that is working really well. So going on to page 11, that just shows you how our IPI model is set up. So we still have a core strategic central team that do all of our data and that type of work. Most of our staff sit in within our 6 local hubs. I also have responsibility for our early help part of MASH, so making sure actually the family journey from coming in through the front door right through the system is the right journey for the family. And we're doing a lot more work now with children's social care. We're working with the children in need families alongside children's social care to again ensure that there's a really helpful handover of those cases when they're ready to be stepped down from or stepped across from that level 4 children's social care. Slide 12 just shows you the structure of how we look and the service that I'm responsible for. So it's very, very much the operational side of IPI that I look after. And in there, we also have a seconded police inspector. Reason being for that is so that actually we can work with the police and ensure, again, that side of operations is really joined up, but also making sure that we are again working with the families and the best person is working with that family, and that works really well. So going on to page 13, one of the projects that I work with in West Sussex is Young Crawley, and Young Crawley was a model that we set up about 3 or 4 years ago, and it was made up of a consortium. Now, as you may already know, consortiums are becoming a really important way for the voluntary sector to be able to access procurement opportunities. So this model was presented to me, and it had taken Young Crawley a while to get the model up and running, but it was voluntary sector organisations coming together under the Crawley CVS, who were the lead agency, and working together again for the benefit of the family. So we came up with the Young Crawley credits model, and actually there's been real advantages, as you can see on slide 13, of why that consortium works. We have one lead agency, voluntary sector organisations working with that one lead agency, but ensuring actually that we're giving the right service to the family at the right time. They all work together, and actually it has worked really, really well. Young Crawley come along to our forum, and you get such a width of a broad width of knowledge coming from that consortium with all of those voluntary sector organisations working together. So going on to page 14.
Thank you, Jo. So my name's Rachel Osan. I'm a practice advisor with Safe Lives, and I've coordinated the development of the interventions that we want to pilot in the Beacon sites. So I'm just going to talk you through how we've gone about that, and then talk through some of the detail of the model. And we'll also hear from Rachel Williams, who is one of our as Suzanne said, one of our pioneers, and she's led on the consultation with survivors for us. So this part is focused on 5 gaps. So people who are at medium risk of harm, people with complex needs, people who want to remain in their relationships, recovery, and children and young people. And we linked with 5 domestic abuse services to do that development. So that meant working with the sort of practitioners within those services, and also the client groups. In addition to working with those 5 services, we spoke to other domestic abuse services kind of around the country, and other survivor groups. We wanted to look at other areas, other sectors, to see what we could learn from them, rather than just focusing on domestic abuse. And I suppose in particular that was mental health and substance misuse and multiple needs services, but also a lot of different children's services, health. We had a bit of a focus around preschool age children, so we were talking to sort of specialist services there. And that was a mixture of looking at kind of research and evaluations, nationally, internationally, also within Safe Lives. And we conducted some practitioner surveys as well. So it's kind of quite a wide variety of information that we would bring together. In terms of survivor consultations, so that was our sort of starting point for all the development, really. So within our development partner agencies, the very first thing that we did was hold consultations about that topic. So each of those 5 services led on one of those gaps. And that was just so that we could get that really early doors. What do you think are the issues around this? What's been kind of survivor experience about what's worked, what the gaps that they've found. And then we would go away and we'd speak to other services, potentially other consultations, look at the research data, and then come back to those survivor groups and say, right, this is what you fed back to us, this is the stuff that we've learned, and these are some of our thoughts, what do you think? And then with those follow-up consultations, they sort of helped shape what's gone into the final design. When we were looking at kind of recovery, we really wanted to try and access as wide a range of people as possible, and also to try and access people that hadn't had any specialist support, because we were interested to see whether there are any differences to what's helped someone's recovery, if they either chose not to access specialist support, if they didn't have access to the right specialist support or any specialist support. So we conducted an online survey to do that, which we had about 200 respondents to, which was really interesting because it was quite sort of a mix of where people were located, their kind of past experiences, whether they've had specialist support. So it's really, really useful for us. So overall, we think it's about 400 survivors that we've consulted with. We also did some consultation with perpetrators around the staying together aspect, which I'll talk a bit more about in a bit. And for all of our consultations, as I said before, Rachel Williams was our lead pioneer. So what that meant was that she helped us think about how we would do consultations, what we would ask, how we would do that, whether we could use different kind of creative ways to do consultations, as well as kind of sort of sitting and talking. She attended the consultations to co-facilitate with us, and I think that made a real difference for people to see that commitment. I think that we just genuinely wanted to hear what people said, and that was going to have a real impact. But I think people sometimes feel more relaxed when they're sort of speaking to somebody that's also got that lived experience. And then Rachel's also she sits on all of the development boards and the national board to make sure that it's not just, our version of what people say, but that she can report directly to what she's hearing in those groups. So Rachel's going to talk through some of the key learning from those consultations.
Hi, my name's Rachel Williams and I'm a pioneer for Safe Lives. Over the last roughly 12 months, I've had the great pleasure of being able to go to different focus groups up and down the country and speak to the women who have survived domestic abuse and violence, and to get their honest feedback, to be able to feed back to you. I felt that the women were very honest, and I felt, being a fellow survivor of domestic abuse, they felt that they could give their honest opinions and their honest feedback, and so hope that the services will be able to take all this on board and help to shape the future services to fit the victims' needs. At the consultation, survivors told us that they were fed up of repeating themselves. This was something that was fed back in nearly all the focus groups. They all said that they got fed up of telling every service, each individual service, the same information. They felt that they only wanted to relay it once to one service, and then that to be fed around for them on their behalf. They also said that sometimes that they felt like giving up asking because they didn't have the support, because they were being let down. They said they felt judged. They also said that they wanted honesty from the services, however blunt and brutal it is, they wanted honesty, because if they had honest answers to the questions, then they could move forward and deal with it. They wanted to be kept informed every step of their case and their journey, so they could plan in advance. They also said they wanted to be in charge of their futures, and they wanted to make their own mistakes, because by making their own mistakes, they could learn from it if need be. And they all said they could see what the end goal was and what they were striving for. But sometimes they said they felt let down by the services, and the support wasn't there. It was only there in the beginning, and it wasn't there so much in the end, when they were coming to the end of their journeys. And they all said also that they strive to become victors, and I think this is something we can help them achieve. I hope you take on board what they fed back to us. Thank you.
So, from all of the learning, we kind of recognised through the development that rather than being kind of 5 gaps with 5 interventions that would be delivered in sort of 5 different ways, that all of those things were totally entwined, and that a person's needs or their journey through support would probably include lots of different aspects of those things, and that's what we learned from clients and from services that we were partnering with. So we kind of came to the decision we wanted it to be delivered as kind of looking like one whole service. Obviously that can absolutely be through a consortium of different services providing aspects of it, but we wanted it to feel that it was one whole service for people, so that there wasn't a sense of, well, I've gone to that service for that bit, then I'm going to that service for that bit, and sometimes kind of losing people along the way. And that through this whole service you can provide different aspects. So we sort of talk about that whole family work, so trying to, as this sort of multi-skilled team, delivering to support different members of the family, hopefully meaning that that's very linked up, and that there's not an aspect of support missing that means that kind of interrupts or prevents somebody from being able to move forward. So the programmes include the whole family work, so there'll be a team that are working with survivors, children and perpetrators. That's where they wish to remain together at that point, and assessed as being ready to be worked with in that way. A peer mentoring programme. One of the key pieces of feedback around recovery was about people having the opportunity to use their experiences to support other people, and some of that can be in really like informal, just having time to spend with other people with lived experience, to a point of, or where somebody wants to use the skills or experience they've got to support somebody else. So it'd be a peer mentoring program to give people the opportunity to do that, but also in a kind of supported way. Groups came out as a really important part of recovery, partly because it's just giving that opportunity for people to meet other people, reduce that kind of feelings of isolation, learn from other people's experience. There's different aspects to that. So people talked about the importance of, the sort of step one on recovery is understanding what domestic abuse is and how that impacts on somebody, and then some of the sort of key ways to start to move forward and recover from that. But then also that kind of next step about getting back into employment, or having the opportunity to go into employment, or increase sort of someone's financial situation, and or just explore other aspects of their life that they might not have had an opportunity to do, as well as things that are fun, like just that opportunity to be creative, and as well as things kind of some physical activities that can really help around trauma, such as yoga and things like that. So the kind of, what survivors are telling us is that it's different for different people and what they might need, but just having the opportunity to access different types of groups or links into community organisations is really important. So there's the perpetrator angle we talked about with the whole family work is so where someone or where a couple or a family is talking about wanting to remain in their relationship, having a kind of process that assesses that in more detail, gives opportunities for survivors to have that space to kind of think about what's going on and what they might want, understand some of the kind of motivation, or whether there is motivation for change, and that can then lead into a longer group and one-to-one program to try and sort of shift some of that understanding and behaviour of perpetrators, while there's individual link support for children, young people and survivors. And we, along the way through the development, we kind of recognised 7 core principles, which I'll talk you through, which just underpin some of the values for this approach, and some of the sort of styles that we want to work in. Interestingly, I think along the way that perhaps wasn't something that we'd initially thought would be such a key part, but came out really strongly from both survivor feedback and practitioners, was about training. So when we were, some of the consultations with survivors were talking about, again in the recovery ones actually, but in other ones as well, but you're sort of talking about what's helped recovery or what's hindered, and they talk about the kind of first response that they get from somebody, that actually if that's not so good or not showing any understanding, that either they feel like they can't talk about it, or it just puts them back sometimes years, or that there's advice that they could have got earlier that would have really changed things or helped their sort of safety and moving forward. So sort of training became really quite key. And then around the when we were looking at the gap around people who want to remain in their relationships, what we understood from both practitioners, we conducted a practitioner survey about that, as well as the survivor consultations and perpetrator consultations, was actually some of the processes that families can be going through, or some of their kind of the expectations from agencies is to separate when they might not feel ready to do that, and that obviously could be for a whole host of reasons, but that by kind of forcing the separation, it kind of means that they sort of can feel more kind of that they don't want that to end yet. They feel more like a kind of united front, and the knock-on effect of that can be where people don't feel able to be honest when they are sort of still in the relationship. So there's a training program that we'll be bringing into the Beacon areas that looks at trying to explore some of the responses to people where they want to remain, and whether there can be a shift from an automatic push for separation to actually assess that a little bit more and understand whether there's potential for it to be safe for someone to remain in the relationship with the right support in place. And it might not be, and that's part of that training, is really understanding some of the different nuances and being able to assess better what's going on in a relationship to be able to make a better risk management decision. So we'll be bringing that training program in as well, but there'll be training around sort of different aspects of the model that hopefully can really add to the existing training that's already in place. So therapeutic support has come up unsurprisingly as an important option for people to have, and what we've learned from talking to survivors is some of the issues around that can be where they are on like long waiting lists to get support, or that when they do get support, if somebody doesn't have that understanding around domestic abuse and coercive control, that it isn't always helpful, or they don't feel like it's kind of helping them move forward in the way that they would want. So we sort of built into the model that about having access to different therapeutic options. In digital support, we've explored both in relation to adults and also to children and young people. So it came through consultation, where there's sort of different suggestions as to what kind of support somebody might want to have online, from things like finding information. So we heard that it can be really difficult to find the right information online. You can kind of spend ages kind of clicking on links or going to different places and not knowing whether the information or advice is right. Online learning, so people talked about wanting to have the option to potentially do a bit of an online course or something that's a bit more detailed that might also link into something in person. Peer networks, so we had lots of suggestions from survivors about how they do meet people with lived experience online through different means, but there's concerns around whether that's safe and how do you know that somebody that you're talking to online is who they say they are. So they were talking about if there was a way to do that safely and have a peer network again that linked into something in person, that they would really welcome that. And counselling, so I think we've sort of seen lots of examples of that with young people, where either as an introduction to counselling that might lead to face-to-face counselling. So I think with all the digital elements, it's really important that it's linked to things that are face-to-face and in person. It's linked to kind of local services. But also sometimes people prefer that anonymity, or it feels safer to not be in a room with someone, I guess. So we've been exploring that and looking at what different options to provide that could be. And we wanted to keep some money aside for practical support that is, which could be something like sort of childcare, or somebody accessing a particular course, or something that sort of individual to what their needs are, but just trying to recognise, and we hear a lot from services sometimes that they sort of there could be something that would really benefit their client, but they don't have the money to provide that, and that can really hold them back. And then the survivor-led review and improvement. So one of the principles is about client involvement. So we've seen the benefits of that through the development, and we want to really give the opportunity for survivors within the service to really feedback and shape and help kind of create further, sort of either further development of the interventions or new things that aren't covered, that turn out to be a gap, or that there's ideas locally about other things that might work. And we've had lots and lots of feedback from survivors about how important that is and how empowering that can be if done well. So that will be a really key part of it as well. So this slide kind of gives you an overview of how the service might look. Probably unhelpfully, I'm going to start at the bottom and work our way up. So as I've just sort of talking about, you've got that survivor voice. There'll be opportunities for people to input into the service, and as well as part of the evaluation will be kind of survivors and clients feeding back, but also just in general around the service. The community IDVA team. So we developed the community IDVA role, and there's accredited training that accompanies the role. So that's built primarily around people who are at medium risk of harm. And the role, it builds on from the high risk IDVA responses. There are sort of similarities and ways in which it links to that. But there's the sort of differences, I guess, are around we've sort of built into the role having time to build the relationships. That's what we've heard time and time again from survivors, but also through research, that if you've been living in with trauma and in traumatic situations, actually building a positive relationship with somebody can be a really essential part of recovery, and can take time, obviously, depending on where that person's at and what their experiences of services have been. So we've built into that role like a gradual sort of 4-week assessment time to allow the client and worker to really get to know each other. And that the support, the whole way somebody's worked with, is in a strength-based, solution-focused way. So it's one of the bits of feedback we had when we were doing the medium risk research, well, the consultations, was about things being very problem focused. And it's hard, isn't it, when you're working in domestic abuse with all the risks and all the different things that happen for, you know, it's quite natural that everything's sort of focused around those things, because you're trying to prevent further harm. What this does, it's not ignoring that, it's still looking at kind of risks and safety, but it's understanding kind of where somebody wants to be, breaking things down into sort of small goals to feel like someone's moving towards those things. But the whole style of working is understanding how somebody manages things, what their strengths are, what their kind of internal strengths, but also where they could link to different kind of community support to really build up their kind of resilience. So the tools and everything that comes with that role is all done in that style. The Engage programme, so this is the programme for people where they're wanting to remain in their relationship. So that's so the community advocate will work with the survivor in that situation, and there's, you know, again, in a really similar style to how the medium risk work works, but they you know, we'll be just doing work around raising understanding around domestic abuse and healthy relationships, really giving that kind of space to that person to, you know, potentially they might change their mind about wanting to remain in a relationship along the way, they might not, but it's done at that person's pace, and just making sure that there's those sort of strategies for change, and they've got the sort of tools to be able to do that if they wish along the way. I suppose it's worth saying that if the aim with Engage isn't about trying to keep people together, if somebody chooses to separate along the way, then obviously they'd be supported to do that through this programme. And I think a lot what we've sort of found in our research was that can quite often be the case, that for either the victim or the perpetrator, that they might decide, along with all the support and the change work that's going on, that relationship shouldn't remain. And so the other thing to say about Engage is that it's for interpersonal relationships, but also family relationships, because in the research what we realised was that quite often where people, you know, it may be more difficult to separate, might be those family relationships. And then complex needs. So we, so again, that's the same type of model, but it's slimming it right back. So a lower caseload, trying to really take the service to the client. And complex needs, there's lots of different definitions for it, I guess. I suppose you might be thinking about domestic abuse, where there's also mental health and or substance misuse. And we, when we were sort of looking at what the sort of definition would be for this post, we were sort of thinking, you know, what we realised is that because of the nature of domestic abuse and the impacts of trauma, actually quite a lot of people may well have, you know, worse mental health due to what they've experienced, or be using substances, but they might engage perfectly happily with a community IDFA or a high risk IDFA. When we sort of looked at some of the where you've got either really sort of severe additional needs or very long-term lasting complex needs, sometimes people just fall through the gaps in services because they services aren't looking at how those needs entwine and how they impact on each other, or people have, you know, had a negative experience in a service previously. So we thought, actually, for this post, it's about looking at those people that really struggle to engage because of, you know, the impact of what they're experiencing, that kind of multiple needs, multiple disadvantage, so that this worker would be kind of working really creatively to kind of engage with clients, that assertive outreach approach, I guess. But also what we knew really early on with this from consultations, what survivors were telling us, but also through speaking to different services, that it needed to be a multi-agency response, that you can have like an amazing person in domestic abuse service, but they're, if they don't have that kind of partnership work, that they feel that they're banging their head against a wall trying to get the right support for their clients. So in Worthing, the multi-agency approach is going to be through MEME, through Making Every Adult Matter. So that's a coalition between Mind, Homeless Link and Clinks, and that's about trying to improve that multi-agency response to people with multiple needs, and again trying to prevent that sort of falling through the gaps in services, or people kind of coming in and out of services but not really seeing change. And it has MEME has these sort of set values that really seem to fit really well with the approach that we wanted to take. And then in Crawley, that would be decided, so there won't be kind of a MEME in terms of that sort of structured approach, but I guess it'll be something similar, and that's be part of the service. We'll be building those links with partner agencies. And then so the engaged practitioners, so they're the practitioners that will work with perpetrators. So it has this two parts to it, the kind of 6 to 8 week assessment stage to understand kind of perpetrators' views on what's going on, their motivation, what's been happening, and just try and assess through that whether that person is appropriate to go on to stage 2, which is the behaviour work, which is a mixture of one-to-one and groups. And by having those engaged workers based in that same team, then it will really, they'll work really closely together with the community advisors and the children and young people's workers. So children and young people's side of support, it's a huge area. There's so many different aspects to what that could be. We focused on for children and young people where there's been domestic abuse within the home, and we looked at kind of what the gaps were nationally, looked at what we sort of did consultation with parents and with young people. So we focused on preschool. That's a big gap nationally for support for children of preschool age. So that would be a mix of obviously supporting non-abusing parents, so through one-to-ones and groups, and also some direct support to the child, so sort of activity kind of based stuff, and just trying to strengthen that relationship between mum and child. And I think there's a really good opportunity there for partnership working as well with related services. That could be joint delivery of groups or different programs, or kind of working in conjunction together. Adolescent to parent abuse, again, seemed to be one of the big gaps and came out really strongly in consultation as well. So we're looking at kind of really tailored support for young people that recognises the sort of the situation that they're in and what's been going on, and kind of tailored support accordingly. Obviously, all the children and young people whose parents or family members are on the Engage programme. And what we also want to do with this is really develop a really sort of strong assessment that's identifying the kind of strengths and sort of needs of that young person, for any young person involved with whose family are in the whole service, and to link in with the support that's already there. So what we would really like to see happen is a kind of a network of the children, young people's workers in West Sussex, like the YIPFers and the other domestic abuse provision that's going on, so that we can kind of really look at how we kind of support each other with those services and can link young people in if there's something that we're not providing ourselves. And then you've got obviously the groups and activities that ran through earlier, and then the peer mentor and peer support coordinator, and then the skills enhancer, so that person that's kind of providing those different aspects of training that complement the model. These are the 7 core principles. So they are about, I guess, trying to really think about the service from before you've reached anybody. So thinking about some of those, it's a terrible label, the hard to reach groups, but how you make yourselves accessible, how you take the service to people, and that kind of real sort of flexibility, holistic support within that. The sort of strengths-based approach, we definitely just come out so strongly with all the research and consultations that kind of underpin the whole style of working, and we're really looking at how we train on that, and we've developed some excellent training with our development partners that really to try and really embed, rather than, you know, what we don't want to do is just have a form that asks a question in a certain way, and that's strengths based, but it's a whole different sort of style of working. So we'll, you know, be making sure we provide lots of support to get people really on board with that. And the trauma informed is, you know, looking at that in lots of different ways and different types of trauma. So that could be, you know, understanding the trauma someone might have experienced as a child, as well as trauma through the domestic abuse, but thinking about the service and how someone's experience of that service could impact quite negatively. So we've got, you know, we're developing resources that really help services think about their whole environment, how their policies and procedures with staff as well as clients that's trauma informed, as well as then a package of support to people that's really addressing some of those issues and really help people move forward with their trauma. So really practical tools that workers can use. Client involvement we talked about, and as well as that, people have an opportunity to feedback about the development of the service. It's also about being, you know, that when you're working, when a client and a worker are working together, it's that they're both sort of got that experts in the support that's needed, and they feel really involved. Like their support plan is the client's own plan. That's something that they're going to get taken, they're taking forward, rather than feel like a service is being done to them, I guess. That multi-agency approach, so there's definite aspects of this, like with the complex needs and the people who remain in their relationship, that's really absolutely requires a multi-agency approach. So just sort of thinking about how we can really, you know, work with local services to enhance that. And obviously from everything that Jo was saying, that's work that's going on already, so it feels great that this can slot into that really well. And then gender responsive is about providing really holistic services that respond to needs of different people, and thinking that really broadly. So I suppose it sort of feels really obvious when you think about kind of domestic abuse and sort of women's services, but it's also thinking about when we think about our clients, like especially our complex needs clients who might be, you know, accessing support in different places, is how can we help other services to think about being gender responsive and what that means. And also for male clients or trans clients, or, you know, that people that we're sort of responding to what somebody's needs are, and that we're not just having a kind of set process for working or a set group, but we're sort of thinking about actually if that's for male clients, do we need to do something that's sort of slightly different that meets their needs? So it's thinking very, very holistically about that. And I will hand over to Dan.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Dan, and I'm the West Sussex Beacon lead. And I've met or communicated with most of you via the phone, email, or in person, I believe. So I'm going to take you through the timeline for the tender and also the tender process and timescales. Firstly, slide 21, and that looks at the timeline from development of Connect to the pilot start and end date, which is 2021. So from today, the 4th of April, the tender is live. And as you're listening to this webinar, you're aware of this, so that's a good start. This tender is open for a month and finishes on the 4th of May. In June, we'll be looking at setting all elements up with the successful applicants. And then from July, we'll be looking at the start of the project. Obviously, if you have any questions, please get in touch with us. We can discuss the timeline with you, as well as any other elements that you may need clarity on. And the best way to do that is to either phone me and I will navigate you to our project management office, or to email them. So on to slide 22. As mentioned, the tender is now live from today, from the 4th, and it will be open until the 4th of May. We will be shortlisting applicants week commencing the 14th of May, and the interviews will be held shortly after this on the week commencing the 21st of May. We'll then endeavour to notify all applicants, or will notify all applicants of the decision the week after, week commencing May the 28th. And then in June, we will be preparing the sites, signing the contract, and also talking and working with the successful applicants for commencement of the project in July this year.
Okay, go on to slide 23, which is the budget. So, I mean, the overall maximum budget is fixed at the moment. So as you can see, it's based on the 3 years, including the setup phase as well. And that's a distribution across the years, but we are aware that, you know, this isn't a one-size-fits-all, so we could be looking to change that year on year, but in terms of the fixed budget, that is staying the same. Now, West Sussex have 25%, that's up to 25% that could be in kind of the budget, and that could be based on resources, seconded staff possibly, buildings, tools and things like that. So we're looking at that in terms of what that actually means for the successful bidder as well. And we will set expected client numbers and the practitioner caseloads. And that will be part of the process for the bidder to provide and demonstrate how they meet those key requirements within the budget as well, with regards to full-time salaries and how we meet those requirements. Okay, going on to slide 24. This kind of gives you a breakdown of the funding. So West Sussex County Council have contributed 50% of it. And then the Safe Lives contribution is broken down. The big lottery fund is our majority contributor of 35%, and then the smaller contributors, Esme Fairbairn Foundation, the Peter Cunhill and other charitable trusts have donated another 5%. And of course that makes up the £1,666,000. And I will now give back to Suzanne, who will talk to you a little bit more about what the key criteria is.
Thanks, Dan. So you've heard about many of these things on slide 25 as we've gone through the webinar. And I guess just to reiterate a couple of them, for us, all of us who are kind of involved in this process, this is about quality and not just about quantity. So it's fantastic that we're collectively able to bring some more money into the area and we're able to create something new. But all of us are absolutely committed to being that highest possible quality that it can be for all the families that we're talking about, not just about, you know, chucking some money at something and hoping for the best. And in that spirit, we hope that everyone who's involved in this process in terms of coming forward and wanting to be part of it will be really, really committed to a spirit of being open and transparent about the things that work, about the things that don't work, about the things that are hard, about the barriers that that are there that maybe we haven't identified at this stage, about the connections with existing local services to make sure that those are as effective as possible. So we're kind of weaving this into the fabric of West Sussex. And that will entail some collection of data and making sure that that's available. It'll ensure being kind of knitted into the conversations that are going on in Norfolk as well, the second beacon site, and really trying to be part of a kind of collective endeavour, I guess, and I hope in a really exciting way. And this is not about external bodies coming in and providing loads of extra scrutiny. It's about all of us not quite sure yet exactly how this will work because we haven't done anything like it before. So really wanting to kind of learn from it as we go along and be really kind of open and honest with each other about how it works. And we're keen, as you've heard, as we've gone through, that people partner up to come forward. So we're pretty sure that no single organisation is going to be able to do absolutely everything that we've described. There will be really specialist skills, experiences and things that you might want to bring in from other people that you know about, either inside or from outside the area. And there are, you know, we know there are benefits and challenges to kind of going into consortium, but we hope that people will really bear that in mind and think about, again, kind of forming those relationships to deliver the best possible service for people. The role of the survivors having their own voice and speaking on their own behalf is really important to us. You've heard from Rachel Williams today, and we hope there'll be many, many other survivors who through this process are able to speak in their own voice and say more about what they want and about what their experience has been, and that we can find ways to amplify those voices and give them the best possible kind of platform to speak out about what's happened and what they need. And you've also heard from Rachel Osan about how we hope that this will be online support as well as offline support, and that's a work in progress. So we're not saying that we know all of the ways that that might work at the moment, but it's really clear that, you know, you're a big geographical area and you've got lots of people who will perhaps struggle to access services in a face-to-face way. So we want to make sure that the service is able to do some of that online work as well as offline, and really think all of that through for people. So I guess I would say in conclusion from a Safe Lives perspective that we are incredibly excited about this process. We feel slightly daunted by it as well. It's quite big and scary, but we think it's a really fantastic opportunity. And you've heard from Jo about how it fits with what's going on locally at the moment and some of the changes that have happened over the last couple of years in West Sussex, and we hope that this is going to be a really fantastic way of taking all of that forward, that it's going to make a real difference for people, that it's also going to act as a really interesting trigger for more people to work in partnership together in a way that's successful, not just forcing people together, and that we come out of it understanding a lot more about what works for people who are living with domestic abuse. So we really hope that you're interested in what you've heard, that you'll join in with it, that you'll have a go, that you'll come forward, that you'll join up with other people, and let's see where we go from there.